The Last Day of June is a game of loss, tragedy, and grief, one that can only be described to you as if you took the first few minutes of Up from Pixar and made that into a video game. That's the equivalent of the level of emotions that this game tries to give you. The Last Day of June has you play as a husband named Carl, ironically also the name of the main character from Up. Boy did I nail that comparison. Anyway, Carl and his wife June are a deeply in love couple, always together, always having fun. It's the cute romantic sap story that some people tend to hate and other hopeless romantics like myself tend to love. One day the lovely couple decides to take a trip down to the lake where June plans to surprise Carl with the present. Sadly, a surprise rainstorm cuts the trip short and has them drive back home. Upon arriving home, a tragedy strikes, leaving our main character paralyzed from the waist down. From there, Carl is gifted the power to travel back in time and alter the actions and scenarios of his friends and neighbors in hopes that these small changes will end up in a much better resolution than what originally happened. The Last Day of June is an 8-hour game with the classic story of things aren't as simple as you think and small changes can have big lasting effects. The game is primarily a puzzle adventure game that doesn't give you too much guidance. Once you start traveling into the past, you play as different members of a small 4-people town, not including Carl and June. As these characters, you play throughout their day and explore the different circumstances that led them to where they were during the tragedy. You'll explore the small sandbox town looking for possible scenario changes that would alter the timeline of events. Controls are very simple. You can move around, power walk, and interact with objects. The simple controls means that more often than not, when I got stuck on a puzzle or was lost at what I was supposed to do, I found myself gliding through the sandbox town trying to interact with every little object until I figured out what the puzzle wanted me to do. After completing a given scenario, you'll see how that changed up the timeline or it completely didn't change up the timeline. Very often you'll realize that even though the small changes alter the timeline, you don't stop the tragedy from happening, and so you have to go back in time and alter another person's timeline in combination with some of the changes you've already made to another person's timeline. Different characters can also interact with different things. For example, the little boy character in the town has a soccer ball that can knock over potted plants, so sometimes you'll have to use one character to open up a pathway only to go back in time as a different character and go through that new pathway. There's definitely a lot of backtracking, trial and error, and a whole lot of repetition. I don't mind the gameplay repetition so much because it truly is vital to the puzzles and ultimately to the story in this game, but the real annoying part of the repetition is the constant cutscenes you have to see over and over again. Every time you change up the timeline of events, the tragedy cutscene plays over and over again. Sometimes it'll be a variation of the event, which is fine, but more often than not, it's the same cutscene you see every time you do a trial and error execution that ultimately fails. Worst of all is that you can't skip these cutscenes, so it's almost like a punishment of having to wade through these cutscenes every time you try to experiment and try to solve the puzzle that you get incorrectly. The worst lasting effect is you can only see something bad happen so many times before it starts to get numb to you. Luckily, the end of the game does turn it around and make a hard hit in terms of emotions that truly do pay off, but damn was that journey a tough one to pull through at times. The Last Day of June has an incredible art style. It's pretty much a watercolor painting come to life. Things in close proximity will show up in focus while everything else will start to blur out of focus into what looks like a watercolor painting. The character models also have a claymation type of look to them, and that's because the entire game is actually based on the music video Drive Home by Steven Wilson, and you'll notice some visual similarities between the music video and this game. Despite not having realistic visuals though, the art style really does look amazing, and more importantly, the dialogueless characters still convey heavy emotions through their subtle actions. It definitely feels one of a kind in terms of the visual department. On the audio front, The Last Day of June comes with heavy slow tracks that really cater to the emotional moments in the game. When Carl and June are having their day by the lake, the slow strings start to pick up and everything just feels right in the world. A lot of the music tracks are well implemented instrumentals that fit in with the emotions trying to be displayed on screen, and that is further improved by the voice acting, if you can call it that. The characters really don't have any dialogue, but rather have little mumbles instead. They're not saying anything, but you still completely understand what the characters mean and the emotions running through their heads. It ends up working really well, with only the younger character in the game coming off as a bit annoying with his voice. The Last Day of June is a bit of a mixed bag. The story being told is a bit of a cliche tragic love story, but I still felt connected and genuinely cared for the main characters. Despite them not speaking, their animation and short mumbles were enough for me to understand them, and their journey definitely had a worthwhile tearjerker ending. What really drags the game down is the gameplay a bit, especially with its repetition. I don't mind backtracking, but rather its repetition of having to see the game cutscenes over and over again without the option to skip them is definitely a big design flaw. I definitely think this game could also use a bit more guidance. In the end though, The Last Day of June is beautiful, albeit not entirely a new concept of a love story that gets dragged down a bit by its repetition. After completing my 8-hour tear-inducing journey, I was happy I pushed through the repetition, but would be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about dropping the game midway through it. The game retails for $20, and at that price I'd say you may want to wait for this game to go on sale. It's a great story to play through, but playing through it is quite a bit of work. And that's not so much from a challenge standpoint, but more from a game design point. That does it for my review of The Last Day of June. It currently retails for $20 on PS4 and Steam. If you'd like to check it out, I'll have a link in the description down below. If you enjoyed this video, then let me know by hitting that like button, and consider subscribing for more reviews just like this one on PS4, Xbox One, PC gaming, and Nintendo Switch. As always, thank you all very much for watching, and keep on gaming.